Hey everyone, so this is going to be a demo to build out a full mean stack project from scratch. So let's see, I'm going to start here from the desktop, or rather I just have in the desktop I have a folder called Angular, so in it we'll start off the first application. So the way I think makes most sense is to build a front end first, and once we have the front end that has all the API calls to the back end, that's when we would build the back end. I think that's also true when you build your own applications if you are doing your own project for clients and those kind of things. You always want to build the front ends first, the clickable prototype first to confirm features and those kind of things, and then build the back end adding the features. Also, when we build the front end, it'll give us a better understanding of what the back end should look like, or rather, what should the database look like, the architecture rather of the database, and those kind of things. Okay, so let's get started. I'm in my Angular folder. I'm actually CD out that to be in the desktop. Let's create our Angular app first. So ng new, and we're going to do a CRUD operation here for users. So we're going to say users app is going to be the application name. Let's build this real quick. So while this is running, again, what we're going to do is CRUD operation. So let's see, we're going to build the users component, or rather the user component, and then within the user component we can have a component for the list, we can have a component for new users, and then within the list we can have a component that will load if each user, we can edit that user, for example. So there we go. All right, let's do this. So let's cd into the users app, or in the users app. Awesome. So ng, sorry, it's been a second. Let's see ng serve here, and let's make sure that we can create a new one here. Localhost 4200, and let's put this up somewhere else so we have it available. There is AppWorks. Let's pull up inspect element. Great, should always have this up. So let's switch over to our editor. Let's now open that folder directory. So in the desktop, we're going to find its users app. There it is. And there we are. So let's get started. In the app folder here, let's see. I'm going to erase that stuff. And I'm going to create my components, right? I'm going to create my user component, and then I'm going to create a subfolder for user details, user list, those kind of things. So let's do those first. So I'm going to create a new terminal window, same place, user directory. This is my app, my Angular application. ng generate component, user component. Let's also create a class of user. But I'm in the app directory right now, so I'm going to cd into source and cd into app. So we are currently in the actual application component. And let's cd into user. So we're in that folder, and here's a user component. So in here, ng generate class user. We have a user class. Let's also generate the component user details. Let's also create a user list. And let's also generate a component for a user new component. Awesome. So now that I have these components within user, let's define, first of all, within the user folder, let's define the, oh, we also need a service, by the way, right? The service is going to be the thing that we will use to make the API calls to grab data for a component. So ng generate service for short, S for short, and then user service. Notice the warning here, the service is not provided in our ng module, so we'll go to ng module, and I will import here user service. Hit enter, auto imports it from the top for me with a shortcut, just make sure we import it. Now we have it imported. Let's switch back over to our main module here. Let's load the user app-user component, right? And if we remember, these components, the user component .ts will tell me that the selector name's app user, and that's why I'm using that there. Great. So now that I do that, let's make sure this is actually working. User workings, because it loaded the user component. Awesome. Now, just for simplicity, I'm going to put here the name in H1 just so I know that's the user component. So it's a little more obvious because I'm going to load within it the other components. I'm going to load the app user list component. I'm going to also load the app user new component, and I'm going to put the new component actually above the list because the list can get large. And then the user details, I can worry about that within the actual list. And as well as the edit, I can do the same thing. I do need the edit component as well as another block of HTML that I will use. So ng generate component user edit, and that is the component that I could do edits with. It'll look just like new component, user new, but it'll be for editing. Cool, so that's it for now. If we look at our view, actually there it is, user new is loading, the user list is loading. So let's create, how should we do this? Initially, we have to remember that one of the components needs to hold all the data. So what we'll do is we'll have the user component, the root component of the user, or rather our root component after the app component, which is our user component. Let's make sure that that stores all the data. So here in the user component, I'm going to create users. But this also reminds me that I need to define my users. So I'm going to go to my user class and create my constructor with all of the properties that I want my user object to have inside of it. So we're going to use here public. We are going to need an ID. We might modify that later when we hit Mongo, because the Mongo ID, I think it's like this. We'll just do it like this anyways. Type actually string, well, number for now, but again with Mongo I believe it gives us out back a string. So we'll leave it as this here. And by default, let's set it to math.floor, math.random times 100. Is that the pattern? I'll double check. So anyways, essentially what I'm doing is every time I create a user, I want it to have a randomized ID, because we're going to be using IDs to pass values around, or rather to pass around the elements, or the users to delete one, update one, those kind of things. Public, let's see, user has a first name, default is empty. Let's do also a last name. Let's do also a email, and let's leave it at that. And first name, last name, email, these all should be string type. There we are, and they're default to integer strings. Cool, so we have that. ID, first name, last name, email for the user. We can also have password and those kind of things, but anyways, let's go. Let's see, so this is pretty straightforward. I can go to my service, and since I already know the user object, or rather this user service could be my service that I use to make the CRUD operation for users. So really I can already build this because I already know the kind of requests that I will need to make for users. So I could do it anytime, but since I'm in the user service, I'm going to keep these names as clean as possible. Like I'm going to create a create method for the create, a destroy method for the destroy, a update method for updating, and get users method for getting users, get user method for get a single user, and of course this should expect a user type user. I'm going to import that so I can have the user object, so I know when I create something I'm going to pass it the user object. When I destroy something, I'm going to pass it the user object I want to destroy. When I update something, I'm going to pass it the user object I want to update. And this can be done a couple different ways. The update piece could be that we pass it the user and the ID. We can pass it the new user that's modified with the right ID. Anyways, we'll just grab the user. Get users, we don't need to grab anything, but we do need to return user array. So we'll say here array of user object. That is the return value for this one. Alright, so this is giving me an error right now because I'm not actually returning anything. And actually, speaking of which, I'm not going to return an array of users. I'm going to return an observable. So it's going to be observable. So observable of user, and observable is part of the RxJS library. So I'm going to put here import RxJS. And I think I have to explicitly say here import observable from RxJS. And that should be okay. But again, it's not working because I'm not actually returning anything right now here. So, in the matter of fact, I'm going to delete that and leave it open for now. Because when I actually do the HTTP call here, that'll work. So let's do that. Let's put here private HTTP, type of HTTP module, which I do want to import, but I don't want the import module to be the HTTP module. I just want the HTTP module, which is just HTTP. There we go. So now I can really just kind of create these things. I know that on create, I'm going to call on this .http module .post to /user. And actually the route is plural, right? So /users. And what am I going to post? I'm going to post the user object that was passed to me. We're going to make it a promise, and then we're going to do the .catch and also the .then for the callback. User is the object I get back. And as a matter of fact, the .then and .catch is not going to be done here, right? Because I'm going to return this promise to whoever called it. And from my main component, I'm going to make those calls. So let's leave this as is for now. We'll put here the return. We do the same thing for destroy, but this is a delete method that should just take the ID, and the ID should be user.id. It's underscore ID. There we go. The update, very similar, but I'm doing a put /user / the ID of the user. And I'm also passing the user object as the post data. So the put is a post request, but that it includes the ID, the URL, and it also includes the object there. And I'm doing it a promise also. Again, I'm making these all promises because I am not going to use the benefits of the observable object, so I'm going to keep them as promises. So as soon as the request is made, the response is made, it's done with. There's no subscription that needs to be unsubscribed, those kind of things. That's good for that. Get users, same thing. We think about this, we're going to do a .get request to /users. It's a get request here because we want to get all users. That's it for that one. And get a single user. This is the assumption that I don't think I will need this really because we're going to parse the users from the front end. If we did need them, it would be a get request for /users / the user.id that I need, assuming that I just have the ID of the user that I want to get. That's possible. And then that would assume that we are actually getting a user object. So I'll do that right there. There we go. Cool. So those are set, and they're done. And really, we could always test them, but let's just leave them like this for now. So my service is done, more or less. It's going to return me the promises that I can subscribe to as needed. Now, initially, our component, our root component, needs to have users, which is a type of user array. So there's two ways we can write that, right? One way is this. By the way, it's going to be set to an empty array. And my user did not get imported, so let's put here import user object from the user current directory user file. There we go. Now it's imported. And we can write the array this way, or we can say users array of user, right? We could do it either way. Both of these work. Just rewrote one a different way. Anyways, we'll keep it this way. I like it because other programming languages use the same pattern that TypeScript uses here. Okay, so this user component does need to reach out to our service. So we'll say here private user service, type user service. Let's import it. There it is. Got imported at the top. So on initialize, well, let's first of all, we're going to create a method that just updates this users array. So I'm going to create here a get users method, which is part of my app, which is my user component. And this is going to call on my service dot get users. This is going to return me the promise, and then I can call the then method, the promise, to essentially fulfill it. But Then I'm going to get users back from it, because that's what I'm going to return back from the server. And I'm going to redefine the users variable, which is this.users, which represents line 11, to be the value of the thing that's given to me back from this callback, which is the users object. Let's see here. Response is not assignable. Right, this response is not assignable because when we were in our service, I forgot to map to these pieces. So we can call on before or after, I don't think it matters, .map, and it might be something that we have to actually import explicitly, or rather I think it might be something we have to do before we change it to a promise. Let's take a look. It looks like, yeah, it looks like the map does exist now because it's part of that object. When I change it to a promise, it's no longer valid. So we're going to keep the map method there, and the map is specifically so that we can run through each piece of this returned object and make sure that it's all JSON type data. So map is going to give me data, and I'm going to call on data and convert it to JSON, all of it. There we go. So I'm going to do that for all of these. There we go. And that should do it. And what I mean by that is it should allow me to, there we go, call the then method on it and just redefine my users array to be the value of users here. Awesome. So every time I call this, I'm going to get all the users. I'm going to grab this piece right here, and I'm going to call it directly as soon as the construct, excuse me, as soon as this component initializes. And to make sure this works, I'm going to go to the user component.html, and I'm going to put an h3 tag here, say user component, and I'm going to print users with a JSON pipe so we can see it. And where is it? We saved it. It might take a second for it to load. No, let's see. New user is here. User list is here. I'm in the user component.html. Let's see if there's any errors here. ng-serve. It's a little weird. I'm in the user component.html. And let's take a look at our app component. Our app component is loading this block here. Oh, right. This pieces are in the wrong place. I did that earlier. So app component should load the app user component, and then the app, the user component.html should load. Okay, there we go. That makes more sense. Should load its pieces and this data here. So I just kind of put the wrong thing in the wrong place. Cool. The array is empty. That's good. It's actually making the HTTP request because I actually called the .then method on it, and there's no server on that route, so we're not too worried about it. We kind of expected that piece, but at least we're getting the empty array and everything is working. Awesome. So for the sake of this working on the front end first and finishing the front end before we meddle with the back end, we could define this to be something. We could just avoid these for now and just say that this user array here is a new instance of user that has, let's see, ID 1, first name, first, last name, last, email at email.com. Very original. And that's it. That's all we need for it. Copy, paste, paste. So I have 3 of them, second user, third user. Let's save it. Let's take a look at them. There's the 3 users, right? So I'm just doing it locally in the front end. Awesome. So it's important to note that in my user component, which is my highest level parent component that's related to users, that's where I'm going to store all the data for users. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to load all of these users so I can list them in the list component. So I know I have the users array available for me in the user component. So if I go to my template, I'm loading the app user list, and I know that's working because I can see it here. But furthermore, I'm going to input into it a variable so I can have it available from inside of it. Users is going to be the name of that variable inside of the list, and I'm going to define it to whatever users is defined on the outside, which is that list that I just created. So in my list component.ts, I need to include input, and I need to expect here input of the variable named users, which I just defined there. And that's it. This is how I can input users in my user list. Now my list component.html has that access, has the variable, the user's variable available to it. And since it's been inputted to this component, if the parent user component modifies the user list, this knows to update. In a sense, asynchronously, but it just has like a watcher on it. So if it updates, it'll update all of its child components that has that variable set to inputted. So I'm going to go to user component.html, and I'm going to create here a division with a ng4. So, and we'll say here, let user of users, so I can just get all the users in each one of these divs, and I'm just going to say here, user dot first name, last name, user.email, just so we can see that coming up. And there it is, first name, last name, email. I'm not too sure if that's the right one because there's no distinction, so I'm at the front here. I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to say user.id so I can see the IDs at the front of it. There it is. Those are the users. Cool. So that's how I've put it into the user list, just like that. Completely misspelled email. Kind of bothers me. I'm going to fix that real quick. Okay. Much better. Awesome. So the list component is essentially done for now. Now I'm going to meddle with the user new component because it's the second biggest thing that I can see make a difference in my application that I'll feel good doing. Because as soon as I can add things, I can see these things modifying. So the new is going to be a little different. I'm already loading it. I can tell because I can see this. So I'm going to go to the new component and create some HTML for it. Let's put an H3 here. User new component. Oh, the user list component. I don't have that, so let's do that also. H3 user list component, just so we can visually know where they started in. There's new, there's list, good stuff. So let's go back to the new component. Let's put here a form. We're not going to use action because that's going to redirect our page. And in the form, we're not going to do anything too fancy. We're going to put just a couple of these inputs: first name, last name, email, and that's it for now. We're going to put another input for submit. The form is going to have an event. It's going to have a submit event that's unique for the form tag. I could have a click event, but I want a submit event, so no matter if you're the input, you hit enter on your keyboard, or if you actually click on the submit button, either way, it's going to trigger this event, and we put the parentheses for the event, right? So we're going to set that to be a value of do some kind of method if this happens, such as create. I'm going to call the create method within my new user component when I want to create one of these new users. And the name, since I'm going to do this on all of them, let me just kind of be a little more efficient here. I'm going to give them all a name. We're going to have first name, last name, email, and maybe that's it. And also, once more, we need to give these also the two-way bound ng model and set that to be some kind of new variable that I'll make in the new user component. So what we'll make here is like a component, a object just like the previous object, the user object, but it's going to be called the new user dot whatever it is that I need to call that part, such as new user dot first name, last name, email, those kind of things. Awesome. So now if I go to new user TypeScript here, I need to make sure that variable is available. So new user is equal an instance to a new user object. I need to import it. There it is. So that's set. Now, I have now these three pieces to be a new user, but if I hit submit, it's going to break or refresh because I said that if the new user method, or rather the form submits, I'm going to hit a create method within my new user component, but there is no create method, so I need to add one here. So we're going to put a create method here. I could console log it to make sure that I'm hitting that as soon as I submit the form. But it should work, so let's just roll with it. So what happens when create happens? When create happens, I know that the new user works, or rather, I know that the user will be the new object we need to modify, or save rather. So I need to call the server to save first, and the second piece I need to do is I need to clear that object. So let's do this by calling on our object, this.new user, and let's set the new user to equal to a new instance of user. And this is interesting because what I'm doing here is I'm redefining the point. So here I'm defining the new user object, or rather label, to be now the address of this new object that was created in line 10. Here I'm redefining this label to be pointing to a new object we created in line 19, and that would happen every single time I hit create. This is a way to avoid my new objects going into my list from repeating themselves. Anyways, let's not spend too much time on that because when we save the server, that won't matter too much. This part here is the thing that will call to the server. We'll have to do a little bit of different work here because when we call it the server, we wouldn't have to do this particular step. But for it to work without the server, what we can do here is we can call on this dot, let's see, we have the create method, and we want to pass this into the list of users. The list of users inside is the parent component to this component. So this component needs an outlet. This component needs an outlet to call out to the parent and give it new data. So I'm going to use output for that. Just like I had input earlier, I'm going to use output. Output is a object, or rather a a decorator called output that we can define in a variable such as like an event rather called create new user, and that is set to be equal to a new event emitter. I'm going to call it create new user event, so it's very explicit, and I also need to import that though. So event emitter, there we go. So when I create, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call on create new event and emit it, and what I'm going to emit is that new user. So this.new user, I'm going to pass the new user all the way to the parent so I can add it to the master list. So I have that there. As soon as I click create, it should call the event, and then it should clear itself, so I have a new set of places, a new set of inputs. What this emits is an event called create new user event on the tag of user new. So I got to go back to my component.html and look into the new component tag and give this thing here an event called create new user event. And when this event gets triggered, emitted, I want to run a block of code such as create. I'm going to put E here for event because I'm actually going to, well actually I think it's like this. This is a built-in event that this tag has. When this event emits, this little block of code has this variable available to it, so I'm explicitly passing it into the create method. The create method should be in my user component. I don't have it, so I need to add it. So let's say here is a create method, and the create method is going to expect the user, type user, and this is where I'm going to call on my users array and push to it the user that I got from that. So let's take a look here. Test, 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 submit, and there's the new user added on there. Let's try it again. There we go. So to recap that, what I'm doing is I'm going into my, let's rather go from the outside. From the outside, from the user component, I gave the new user component tag an event so that the inside of this tag, through my TS file, I can emit this event and run this block of code, and the event itself I want to pass into the create method. And the thing that I'm passing into it is whatever thing that I emitted from within. So if I look at this, from within I emitted and I passed the new user I want to emit, and that's what I used. Awesome. So that's the create method. We have the list, and let's also do the delete, and maybe I'll have you do the edit, or maybe I'll add that later, but let's do delete. So if I go to my list component, well, we can just add a delete here real quick. I'm going to create a button here, and the button will say delete, delete, and it'll have a click event. So if I click this button, it will invoke something called destroy. And what I'm going to pass into the destroy parameter is this exact user that I want to destroy. So I'm going to call it destroy. So I'm going to call it destroy also, because I believe all over when I talk about CRUD, create, update, delete. Well, I call it destroy because sometimes delete is like a reserved word, so I feel like destroy is a safer word to use, generally speaking. But I think you can choose between delete and destroy. It's not that big of a difference. Anyways, I need to make sure I have a method called destroy within my user list component. List component.ts. Let's create a method here called destroy. It expects a user of type user. User doesn't just exist here yet, so I'm going to import it. There it is. Now I have the destroy method, and I want my list to remove one of these components. So what does this need to do? The exact same thing my new component did. It needs to also output a destroy user event, which is going to be equal to a new event emitter, which I need to also import. There's an emitter, there's input, let's put here output, there's output, there we go, cool. So on the destroy method, let's call the event, so this dot destroy event, let's pass it, dot emit, and let's pass it the user we want to destroy, which was passed to the parameter. So if I look on the outside of this component, if I go to .html, my list doesn't, well, it needs this to pass in the users, but now it needs also an event, which, what did I call it? I called it destroy user event. So from the outside, I'm going to have an event called destroy user event. I'm going to have something called destroy within now the component itself, and it's going to expect to pass in the event that I passed into it. So if I go to the user component.ts, I should have a destroy method here. It would be faster, by the way. I wouldn't have to use these pieces if I was using the backend. So, but it's okay. It's good practice. User type user, and here I'm going to user array dot in. This dot user array find the user array dot. I could do dot find. I think we can use dot find. Let's find the user. That should give us. Oh yeah, value. So let's do dot index of to match it. And as a constant, because that's not going to change every time the method runs. And now we know that users of that index is the thing we want to destroy. So we're going to call on this dot users dot splice. Let's splice at I, and let's splice 1 to remove. And let's give it a shot. There's this first one getting destroyed, the third one, the second one. Let's add one to make sure we can destroy it. There's something we added. Let's destroy it. Cool. So it's working. So we got that working. We got destroy working, create working, retrieval is already there. So we're good on those pieces. I suppose the last piece we should do is the update. And we're going to do each one of these components in the list. But one thing that I should change in the user.ts, I'm going to give this object another property called editable. I don't have to, but I think this is an easy way to go about it, or rather a proper way to go about it. I'm going to set it to Boolean false, so initially it's editable set to false, because it cannot be edited, or rather, whatever. So let's go to the user list, and for each one of these in the loop here, I'm going to load the edit component if the user.editable is set to true. So we're going to create use the tag, the user. I did have user details there. These user details could take over this whole block. I am not going to use user details. We just don't really need to for this basic project. But we could use it. But we will definitely use user edit. We need to edit each and every one, and perhaps you want to be able to edit each and every one individually as you click on it. So let's put the tag app user edit, and let's pass into it an input of the user object. Well, the value of the input is going to be user on the inside, but the value from the outside is the user, and this represents the single one from this for loop. Remember, this thing is repeated for every single one, so every single instance of this div being repeated, user represents that unique user in that loop. So each one of these tags here has its own unique user it's pushing into the app user tag. So when I do this, I would be loading the user edit component, and I'm expecting to pass into it the user object. So I need to go to the edit component.ts and make sure that I have here input user, and I need to make sure to import it. Go. Awesome. So now that user component has that available, let's go to the edit.html and make that look nicer. H5 user edit component. Let's save that. Let's take a look. Right now, the user edit component is loading for every single one of those. And why is that? Because if I look at my list component.html, I don't have an ng if that is kind of stopping this from showing. They're all going to show. So I'm going to add here a condition that says ng if this condition is true, show it. If this condition is false, don't show it. User is the object I have is available for me for each instance of the user from the array of users. So I'm going to call it on user.editable, which by default for all of these is set to false. So none of them will show. But I should be able to add a button here. By the way, kind of bothers me, the buttons over there. There we go. That we can say edit, and then on the click event, we are going to change the instance of user. We're going to say user.editable is going to equal to whatever user.editable is the opposite. So this kind of keeps flipping between true, false, because every time I use this symbol, I'm changing the... So if this is a truthy type value, or rather this is actually a Boolean, so if this is true, the exclamation mark will make it false. If it's false, the exclamation mark will make it true. So it keeps redefining itself separately. So let's take a look. There's, now it's true, now it's false. Now it's true, now it's false. You can see it up there as well. Now it's true, now it's true, now it's true for all of them. And false, false, false. Cool. That's great. Now the edit has the user itself in it. So that's good. So let's see. Let's go to the edit. Now we have the user here. On initialize, let's make also a variable here. By the way, this user object that's passed into it is a type of user, so I could just do that. Oh, right, it's not inputted, so let's see if I can just auto import it. Awesome. We're going to also have one here called user edit. User edit is the user that we're going to be editing because I want to keep that copy available for me and not modify it, just so I can, if I need to refresh, reset back to the original user object, I don't have to keep pulling from the server. I can keep it on front end. That's more of a design approach, how you want to do it, but I think this is proper. I'm going to set this by default to a new instance of user. And then as soon as this component is constructed, or really on initialize, we're going to set object dot, I think it is, let's see, if we want to copy it, assign, I believe it is. Let's see. Copy the values of all the enumerable something or other. Copy the values of the enumerable own properties for one or more of our objects. Awesome. Yep, so that's the one. This is going to help me. And I believe target is source. Target is user edit. That's the target I want to copy onto. The source of who I want to copy from is the user object, and these are all instances of this object. And when I say this object, I'm referring to when Angular runs, this class becomes an object. So this is referring to that object. So cool. So that should be it. When that happens, I should have this.user edit be the user that was copied over. I'm going to test this. There we go. There's 1. There's 2. There's 3. There's 1. Awesome. So now my user edit, it can have a form, and the ng model property is going to be the user edit. So I'm going to go back to my new component.html. I'm going to be a little lazy and copy the content. So my edit.html, I could just paste it. And this is going to be the update method. And all this stuff is correct except for the fact that I'm not using the new user, I'm using user edit object. So if I refresh this and I click edit, there is the first, there is the second, and there is the third. I know this is the right one because I can see it here changing the right piece, but it'd be nice to also see the ID there. Anyways, we're set with that. So if we go back here, we have now an update method if this form submits. So we're going to go to the edit.ts here, and we're going to give this another function called update. And update really should just do an API called the server and update. It's going to take a little longer for us to do it on the front end only, because we need to, like, in a sense, propagate up all the way to the root component and update that particular one. So what are we going to do when we update? Well, this.user edit is the thing we want to update. This.user is the thing we want to update. So this is the new thing we want to update to, but this is the thing we want to update, right? So it sounds a little weird, but this is the thing that we got modified, and this is the thing that we kind of left. So really, we just need the ID. But I'm kind of making an assumption here that not all of them have IDs. So the question here is, do I just rely on the ID as I should on all projects, or do I rely on the actual object copy? I think just the ID is fine. So anyways, what do we need to do here? We need to change that user object, but we need to call up. So we need here an output. User, actually, output is going to be an event such as update user event, and that is equal to a new event emitter. And output also needs to be included, output. So I'm going to have my edit method bubble up to my list, and that bubble up to my user component to make the update on this particular piece. And on the update method, I'm going to pass it, or rather on the event, on this event, when I emit that event, this.that.emit, I'm going to pass it an object. So it's easy to keep track of original, which is, really I don't need that because I just need the ID, but we'll just do it. This.user is the original, comma, updated is, or edited is going to be the this.user edit. So the emit is going to be an object with the original key and edited key. So when this emits, it's going to come up to the list component, and this list component now is going to have a event called update user event, and that's going to say update, and it's going to expect the event to be called into it. So now my user list should have an event, an update method, which should expect that object that I passed it. So list.ts should have an event called update, and this should expect an event, which really is the objects. And now this can call its own event. So it's a little weird that we're doing multiple outputs, but that's okay. Again, when we do the front end and back end, we don't have to do that. We just need to call up the parent and update our list, and that's enough. But right now we have to kind of do it by hand. So update user event, I'm going to call here this.update user event.emit, and I'm going to pass the objects into it, or users. I'm going to call it users because they are our users that we're updating. It's the original user and the edited version of the user. So this has an update user event that will be emitted on the user.html component there. So I have there the list component has defining the user. It also has destroy user event. It'll also have now update user event, which is going to check on update, and it's going to expect the event. So if we go to user.component.ts, I need here an update that should expect users. Let's just say any, because it's an object. And if we console log here users, we should have the objects, the two different objects. So let's say 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4. There's the user objects. There's the original, which is first name, last name, and there's the edited, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4. So I passed both of them up. Again, I wouldn't have to do all this extra work if I was building front end and back end. Or rather, if I had my back end already completed, I would not have to do this piece. So maybe I'll rethink the approach on that. But anyways, I digress. So now that I have these, I can just update. I can say this.users, which is my users object here, dot index of, let's find the index of the users.original. That's the constant of I, and let's call on this.users of I, and let's redefine that to equal to users.edited. And that should do it, but let's just ABC, DEF, submit, and it made the update. And if we undo edit here, we are good to go. It made the update just fine. So that's it, that's the edit. Now, I'm doing the update, but the little window is staying open. That's again, that just depends on the expectation. We can make that a change anywhere, I believe. I think it makes sense to do it after we call the update method. So let's see, edit.ts. We would admit, but we don't really. I think we could just call this dot user edit.editable and set that to false, and then do the call. Let's take a look. So ABC, I should be no problem. DEF, but let's double check. Yep, just fine. It closes that for me because I set it to false. No problem. Okay, so that is the first piece of our CRUD operation for our application. Seems like it took about 40 minutes or so, 42 minutes for a full CRUD. Not too bad. I'm going to take a pause on this project here, and then we're going to finish off the backend.